Today we're going to focus on women. Now, men, you can still listen because you're going to find some important things here. But there's a lovely lady by the name of Rima Bonario who has written a book called The Seven Queendoms. And the whole focus is really helping women to develop that personal sovereignty and maintain that healthy balance between caring for others and caring for themselves. So it's going to be just a wonderful discussion. She's talking about 7 different areas that are so important. And again, she's written this book called The Seven Queendoms, which you can find on Amazon or you can find on her website, which we will share during the interview. So I hope you'll join us, and I know that you're going to enjoy it.
At the end of the day, it's not about what you have or even what you've accomplished. It's about what you've done with those accomplishments. It's about who you've lifted up, who you've made better. It's about what you've given back. Denzel Washington. Welcome to Inspire Vision. Our sole purpose is to elevate the lives of others and to inspire you to do the same.
Rima, welcome to the show. It's so good to have you here.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here with you today.
Well, and you've written this incredible book, The Seven Queendoms. And, I always am curious how people get to the place that they are when I'm interviewing them about why they're doing this and obviously the good that it's doing. So share with the audience your story. How did you come about getting to this point in your life and doing what you're doing?
Well, probably I would have to say that the most important thing that happened to me was that I had a daughter. I became a mom. And when I became a mom, I wanted a different outcome for my daughter than I had in my growing up years. I grew up in a somewhat volatile household, and I didn't want her to have that experience. But making that decision to not be volatile the way that my parents were wasn't just something that happened with a sentence. I got introduced to all the ways that I was failing at that, so that I could actually do the work, put the time in to change what was going on the inside of me so that I could be the kind of mother that I wanted to be. And one of the things about children that's so amazing is that they haven't been socialized when they're young anyway, into covering up their emotions and their responses. So she was a pretty fast mirror when I failed to give me that feedback that I hadn't shown up in a way that I wanted to, that was loving and kind and encouraging for her. And so I got into shadow work, and I started learning about being more conscious in my choices. And I discovered that there was a whole slew of experiences that I had growing up that had primed my nervous system to see the world as a very dangerous place. And so small things that should have been easy to handle were not easy for me to handle. And I lost my temper, and I would get, raise my energy, because that was the habit that I was in. And I had other habits too that weren't optimal. I worked super hard, way too long on all the wrong things, because I was trying to earn some sense of being enough in the world. And that was also a kind of a holdover from childhood. And then that negatively impacted my relationship with my husband. I was so busy doing, and in what I call the masculine energy, or the masculine archetypal energy of pushing and driving, so that I wasn't able to be soft and receptive and in my more feminine energy when I got off work and wanted to spend time with him, or when we were wanting to be intimate in our intimate life. And all of those things sort of came together and made me realize something had to change.
Wow. And you know what? It's interesting that so often we talk about something has to change, but that awareness really doesn't happen real easily, does it?
Yeah, I think it takes something that really brings us to our knees. As human beings, we have a tendency to respond to painful life circumstances, that creates a doorway for change. So I've come to see those moments now as the gifts they are, as the portals into healing. And I don't run from difficult experiences anymore, because I've been through enough of them that I know on the other side is going to be something really wonderful if I choose to lean in and use it for my benefit. But it can be challenging, the first few go rounds with that. And some people end up getting stuck in an idea that's more of a victim-y experience, where it just starts to feel like the whole world is against me. And that's, understandable that people can go there. And part of what I teach and work with and I write about in the book is how to see these obstacles, these challenging circumstances, as invitations for us to actually become more of who we truly are in our deepest self.
Yes, and I think the challenge is that awareness. And heavens, unfortunately, a lot of time the awareness only comes when we've gone through some real traumatic situation. Wouldn't it be nice for people to become aware of that without going through that? And I think that's part of why I'm happy to have you on the show, because I think sometimes just this type of conversation can cause someone to just stop for a minute and go, you know what? I am not experiencing the life that I really want to experience. And the minute they think that, then it's just a matter of trying to figure out, as you have, how do you go about eliminating some of those subconscious imprints that affect all of us, and free ourselves from that so that we can move forward.
Well, and that's really the good news, is that we can actively work on those patterns, the places and ways that we were conditioned as a young child. It's just a life experience, and they become habits that our body really leans into. And that was new for me to discover, that these habits actually lived in my body. And it didn't matter if I just tried to think happy thoughts and cover them over with happy thoughts. I actually had to go in and work inside of my neural net and inside of my nervous system and inside of my large muscle groups in order for those energy patterns to shift and get unstuck. And it's actually fairly simple once you start the work to get in and make some changes, but it's in an arena that we don't typically think of.
No, and I think so often even people around us, if we tend to talk about it, can be a little bit negative or discriminating against that type of thought process. And yet, when you look at what's going on and all the research that's going on, you talk about habits, and in my mind, everything that we do, for the most part, is a habit. And a lot of it comes from that subconscious experiences of childhood and so forth. And it takes time to change a habit. It's not easy to do. So where did this idea of Seven Queendoms originate and come from, and kind of explain what that's all about?
In my journey to heal myself, one of the things that came up for me was this idea of wanting to claim greater self-sovereignty in my life. Sovereignty is this idea that we can be in a form of self-governance that's free from outside influence, where we get to be the absolute authority in our lives. And I had not had that experience where I was free, as you say, from all the voices and the old tapes and the people that lived inside my head, to actually choose. And I wasn't free from the habits that were in my body. So I wanted to develop greater sovereignty. And as I was looking at the areas that I wanted to have this sovereignty, I realized that there were 7 distinct areas that I wanted to create sovereignty in my life. I wanted to have spiritual sovereignty, mental sovereignty. I wanted to have sovereignty in terms of my service in the world, or my dharma. So it's a Buddhist word I like to use that describes sort of why we're here, what's in our nature to give to the world. I wanted to have sovereignty over my emotions. I wanted energetic sovereignty, sexual sovereignty, and physical sovereignty. And as I was doing my work to explore what would sovereignty look like in each of these areas, I called on the Queen archetype to help me with that. And I did a lot of research around this archetype. And archetypes is just a shorthand way of saying that this is a concept that lives inside the human psyche. It's something everybody in the human family can connect with. You know, when we say the good mother archetype or the strong father archetype, everybody knows exactly what that means, you know. And so the same is true for the sovereign, whether that's the queen or the king. And so I ended up creating a body of work that I was sharing in my classes with my students around how to access each of these areas, and they became the Seven Queendoms.
Oh, wow. Wow, that's cool. And you mentioned you mentioned the king. Obviously, you're talking about the queens here, but as you had mentioned a little earlier when we were chatting, there's a lot of men that read your book too.
Yeah, I've had comments from, generally speaking, they're the husbands or partners of the women who found the books, or my family members, you know, who've been reading it because they want to support me and they're interested. And they've said, wow, I learned a lot. I learned a lot about my psychology. I learned a lot about the brain. I learned a lot about understanding shadow work and what that means, the sort of psychological idea of we have parts of ourselves that we like to keep hidden or that are unconsciously hidden that need to come out into the light. I talk about lifting up the rug so that we can see what's under there. Those all kinds of bumpy things under there that make us stumble and fall in our day-to-day living. And if we'll just take the time to lift the rug and see what's there, we can get rid of those impediments. And so they've learned a lot. And very often it's interesting for men to read about the Seven Queendoms and just change the language for themselves and make it a king. And they can ask the same questions for each of these 7 domains, that everybody has these 7 domains within them that they would like to have greater sovereignty on, or they could have greater sovereignty in. And so it's an equal opportunity book for people who want to explore. However, it's particularly meaningful for women because I think women face a slightly different challenge in that we are still trying to find ways for us to carve out a path where we feel that we are free from interference from outside experiences. And we've made a lot of progress, but we're not quite there yet, where we're still living in a world that was largely created by men and for men, and tends to work much better, for example, for the male body, the way the male body runs energy. What charges the male body is this activity of being out there and doing and being very driven. Whereas for women, we can do all that, and we love to do all that because all of us have masculine and feminine energy inside of us, but it drains us to do that, and we need to receive. We're actually built for receiving. And so sometimes we can think about the phrase that giving is receiving, and that's true, and it tends to work a little bit better when men give and send energy outward. It charges them so they receive. It actually works better for women if we receive first and then give from this place of luscious overflow. What I see happening in my students is that there's a tendency for women to, because very often we're the primary caregivers and things of that sort, we give so much that we give out, and we just hit a wall, and we very often will become resentful because we're waiting for someone to come give back, you know, like we empty our well and we're waiting for someone to come fill it up, and nobody's coming, you know. I mean, it's just not happening. So it's much better for us to fill our own well and let that water flow out, and then we have all this extra to give, and we can give without feeling drained or resentful. And it's a challenge. It's something women have to get good at doing.
Well, and you bring up an interesting point. You said a lot of times it's the husbands that are looking at the book too when the wives do that. But what a blessing I can imagine it would be if you have both the man and the woman really looking at this and really doing that. First of all, having the awareness that, yes, you know what, a lot of my behavior as a man has to do with who I'm not really, but everything that I've been taught. I can't even imagine what it would be like in a relationship where you're both aware and working on that and being able to communicate that. It must make a huge difference.
Well, I can tell you, I just celebrated my 20th anniversary with my husband, and we are so blessed that both of us are deeply aware of these concepts, very much engaged in our own personal growth individually, and then our growth as a couple, and focus on our relationship and put these principles into practice. And it makes a huge difference. It makes an incredible difference where we have a really deep intimacy that's built on a foundation of trust, so that when things come up, we really trust each other to be able to work through it. And that intimacy allows us to feel so well connected and in a safe, what's called safe and secure attachment, that we have the space to go out and also be individuals and explore on our own, have hobbies and activities that we do. And we feel very confident in the relationship, so that there's both spaciousness and intimacy. And this is where I think couples often run into trouble, is how you navigate moving in and out of intimacy, because you can't be, sort of stuck to each other 24/7. And sometimes couples have different needs around how much time they want to be together, how easily they can move into states of intimacy, whether that's emotional, spiritual, sexual intimacy. And you have to have language to talk about these things and common ground to negotiate.
That's true. And let's go through, if you don't mind, let's talk about the seven queendoms. Let's talk about each of them individually and what you see are some of the biggest challenges that both men and women, but you're focusing on women, how they work through that to some degree. I think we have a little bit of time to do that. So do you mind doing that, of going
That
through
would be
each one of
great.
those?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So we can start with the what I call the divine queen, who helps us with our spiritual sovereignty. And I like to start there because one of the ways that I approach spirituality is from the doorway of trying to connect to the deepest essence of who we are, what I often call my soul. And some people use different language. They might call it their higher self or their intuition, but it's the part of us that actually knows the deepest truth of us, that's uncorrupted and unconditioned. And it's a spiritual connection. It's a connection to that part of us that's connected to whatever we think of the divine being. And it doesn't matter if you were raised in a religious faith, what that is, or whether you have no religious faith at all, you can still have this deep spiritual, profound connection with the core of yourself. So that's what the divine queen helps us do.
Okay.
And
I'm going to stop you
sure.
there for just a minute, because I think that's fascinating. We have so many different religions out there, world religions, Christian religion, all of them that are out there. And so often it's so much focused on outside, elsewhere, this and that is going to come in and affect me, and that type of thing. But what I hear you saying, and I happen to believe this, is that who you really are, that divine self within you, is just amazing. But most people never figure out how to touch and get in touch with that divine self, because I think if they do that, all sorts of miracles can occur.
Absolutely. And I think this is a big part of the conditioning. I would even call it sort of the falsehood that we've been born into as humans, that we have to always look outside of ourselves for the rules and the structures and the guideposts and how to live. And it's not that that's not helpful. It's certainly helpful to have that, information and have community and have structures that are outside of ourselves. But what we really, I think, if we want long-term success with this, what we really need to do is cultivate an inner sense of our own personal integrity. Like, what does it mean for me to be on my best behavior and in my best self and have my most self-expressed version of me? How do I get to add more love in the planet and become an example of whatever my faith tradition might be, or no faith tradition at all, if it's just an example of being a good citizen? And so that comes from inside, and we own it most when we learn to develop that sense of inner integrity. And really, that's what this work is all about, this self-sovereign work. It's about finding those points within ourselves where we identify how we want to show up in the world and seek to be that, whether that's spiritually, mentally, emotionally, physically, all of the different ways.
Well, and what comes to my mind, and I do have a Christian background, but what comes to my mind is a particular saying that, be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. And as I've looked at that more carefully, that word perfect really isn't the correct definition of what the original Greek and Hebrew says. It's more be complete. And when you think about that, and I look at that and going, wow, what they're really saying is be yourself, be complete, be whole. And it's an entirely different approach than this perfectionism that gets so drilled into our minds.
Yeah, I think perfectionism is a real problem because it actually is part of that conditioning that says who we are is not okay. And so we spend the rest of our lives battling to try to become this thing we're not. And that's all about what someone else says we should be, rather than
That's
having it
right.
come from the inside that says, well, no, this is the truth of my being, and I'm going to live the truth of my being to the fullest that I can live it. And it takes courage to do that. It takes courage because somewhere along the lines, most of us got the message that who we are wasn't okay, that parts of us were not accepted and loved, and that while naturally we do need to learn how to be part of a community, so sometimes we have to curb some of our desires or wants or put them on hold for a little while. That's an important skill that we get as we mature. But when that gets presented like the person that we are is just patently not acceptable, that becomes a dysfunction inside of the human psyche. And today, a lot of our marketing, the way that people sell products, are designed to make us feel insecure about ourselves so that we'll spend money on their supposed cure. And that over time just can often lead us into this place of believing that who we are is not enough and we have to achieve some perfectionistic standard it's not even real.
Well, and it's interesting. I do a behavioral analysis type of program that does a profile on an individual and what their values are and so forth, what their personality is like. But what I love about it is it talks about the fact that we really have three different personalities. We've got that innate of who we are. We've got that social of who we need to be. And as you were just bringing up, and then we have, the conscious of how it all kind of comes together. But what I find interesting, and I think you've hit it on the head, is so often if we're in that social situation, we have a choice, although we don't necessarily know that. And that is, do we behave in a way that we're told we have to behave? So it's these shoulds and ought tos and all that type of stuff. Or do we consciously be ourselves, or consciously in a particular situation go, okay, they can't handle that, so I will certainly, behave in a particular way out of respect, but it's not because they're having to or should, but because they choose to. They're in control. And I think that's a big difference that you just brought up.
Yeah, that's so well said. I mean, it really boils down to we're trying to create opportunities for choice so that we're not acting out of old habits and old patterns, but we're making a decision in the moment. And the way I like to think of it is this, how trustworthy is the person that I'm with in terms of what do I show, in the deepest parts of my heart? Are they really somebody I can feel that I can trust those deepest parts of my heart to? Have they earned my trust, or is it someone I've just met, I don't know them very well, or I can already tell that they see things in a particular way? Well, maybe it's better for me to try to meet them where they are, instead
Exactly.
of feeling like somehow I have to share all of me and then I get upset or unhappy if they reject some part of that.
Yes.
Being mindful about how we interact with people. As a sovereign queen, we get to choose, how we make those decisions. We become skilled at that. We become skilled at assessing what's needed in the moment.
Yeah. And the key is you are in control. You're no longer at the effect of the outside environment, but you are in control. All right. So number one is spiritual. What was number two?
Number two is mental. This has to do with how we think, the way our thoughts operate. Are we more of somebody who sees things positively and we have a tendency to believe we can achieve things? Or do we criticize ourselves? Do we have that inner mean girl or inner mean boy? I think all of us have that inner critic. And the visionary queen, her job is to help us see through illusion. So she helps us really question our thought processes and try to come up with more clarity around what's actually happening. By the way, all of these queens have two shadow expressions where you can have too much of a good thing or not enough of a good thing. And that's another way that people learn by reading this book, to find that center point where we're really in that place of centeredness and moving from authenticity, where we can see the downfalls of having not enough mental sovereignty and then trying to be too much in our mind. So each of these queens has some shadow aspects to it.
That's great. That's great. And it's so true. So true. How, yeah. Anyway, go on.
Yeah. So the third one is the queen that has to do with our dharma and our service work, how we use our voice in the world, how we express, how we give our gifts. This could be our work life, but it might also be our vocation, right? We could have a vocation that's not our work life or an avocation. So that's all about, are we expressing truthfully? Are we sharing the depth of who we are from a truthful place? Do we need to take up space all the time and be on stage? Or are we really shy and we're not really willing to be in our use our voice well? So that's what the expressive queen helps with. The loving queen helps with our emotional sovereignty. And she really helps us to get a sense of how we are in relationship. She's all about the right to give and receive love, to be able to love ourselves as well as love others. And how we love ourselves is a really good indication of how well we're going to be able to love others. And sometimes people don't realize that. They think that, no, I'm really good at loving others, but I don't love myself really very well. Well, I lived a lot of years that way. And what I learned was that wasn't actual loving that I was doing for those other people. What I was doing was trying to get my needs met by loving everybody else first, and thinking that if I just took care of everybody else, then they would take care of me and everything would be good and everybody would feel good and all life would be fine. And I learned that it doesn't work like that. Really, our primary responsibility is to care for ourselves first and foremost. And just like if something happens on the airplane, you're told you need to put your own oxygen mask on first, because otherwise you can become a burden. When you wipe yourself out and don't take good care of yourself, you become a burden to those around you. You're not actually able to be in a loving space, and resentment, as I said, can creep in. And so we have to develop the loving queen. And I keep pointing to areas of my body because as I was doing my research around this, I discovered that these queens actually align with the energy centers in the body. If you are aware of the chakra system, they actually have energy centers in our own bodies that are connected to nerve ganglia. And those nerve ganglia respond to our nervous system and our thought processes. They affect organs in the body and different parts of the body. So they affect our physical health, but they also affect our mental and emotional health. So that was a whole nother way that these queens began to manifest themselves, is energetically. And actually then that leads us into the fourth area of sovereignty,
Okay,
which is
I want to go back to the emotional area first.
Absolutely.
All right. So are you familiar with the emotional guidance scale by Abraham Hicks?
Oh yeah. I love it.
All right. So, what I find is interesting is oftentimes people, without even realizing it, are kind of stuck in one of those lower emotions, whether it be anger. You brought up victimhood, which is really way down there. But, victimhood, anger, resentment, all of those types of things. And oftentimes people are totally affected by that. I know when I was working with businesses, one of the things would talk about if they had, at least 5 employees. So I worked with smaller businesses, but usually I'd go in and say, I guarantee you that if you've got 5 employees, one of those 5 is down that scale. and they are bringing everybody else down, and they are affecting overall your productivity and everything that should be going on. And sure enough, when we put some certain things in that required some personal awareness and reporting of what they're actually doing, they would leave, they would quit.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you just saw everything go sky high. So how do you help people who may be stuck in one of those lower emotional levels move up to the point where they can start to experience, as you're talking about, that love and all of that type of thing?
Well, emotionally, one of the things that's important for us to recognize is that when we get triggered, we become flooded with all kinds of hormones and stress hormones, and our body actually prepares to do battle. And the way we deal with that battle can be varied. Some people can be combative and actually fight you. Other people will just, become passive aggressive and, behind the scenes kind of try to scuttle things. Even if they're not conscious that they're doing it, it can happen all the time, like in work environments, as you were describing. And then other people they become so overwhelmed when challenges happen that they simply just shut down and almost go away and disappear. And that form of stuckness is, well, all of them are terrible. Like some of us can just feel like I felt so stuck. I didn't stop my temper from exploding. That was a learned behavior that I used to try to make myself feel safer. And it was modeled for me in my house. I mean, we're hot-head Italians. This is what we do, And so I had to really work at shifting that behavior and coming up the scale. The shutdown, the place of complete collapse, is the worst thing that can happen to us. That's when our that comes from polyvagal theory. So when your vagus nerve is so activated that you drop all the way into this place of, deep despair, and there's no point, and I can't go on. That's the worst possible place. We actually have to move up into feeling a little more energy, even if that's a bit of a fight energy. That's at least a little more useful for the body before then we come back to this place of center. And really, I think that there's this great proverb about the student wanting to meet the master and traveling all the way up to the mountaintop to meet the master with his one burning question. And he asked the master, how is it you always stay centered? And this world-renowned master just laughed and said to the student, oh no, never centered, always moving to center. And this is the idea, is that we're humans, and we're going to have these moments when we feel stuck. We're going to have these moments where we're disappointed or angry or whatever the emotions are that we name as negative. And if we have a relationship with those emotions that says, this is a natural part of being human, and I'm going to let myself feel what's here and be curious about what's under that. Anger often is an indication that there's been a boundary violation going on. And so we can use it to say, what is it that I need to be speaking of? How do I need to use my expressive queen to say no to something, rather than, instead of being angry, I can feel anger, but then instead of lashing out, I can speak out with consciousness. So that's the way that I support my students in becoming aware of what's going on. And it's very body based. You have to allow your body to do its thing. We're animals, you just have to have a mind.
True. Okay, let's go to number 4.
So now we're into the bottom 3 queens, or the lower 3 queens. And these are the most challenging because they come with these lower 3 chakra energies, which are these denser energies of our power center, which is the empowered queen. And she's all about helping us understand that we are allowed to be an individuated self. And this is a challenge many of us faced growing up, where we were told, you're a bad boy or you're a bad girl, just because we wanted to keep the toy to ourselves. We weren't in a sharing mood, and instead of being invited into that in a way that wasn't shaming, our parents or our teachers or our religious institutions might have used shame to try to change our behavior. And that translates to the very young mind as who I am is not okay. I'm not okay. And then we spend the rest of our lives trying to figure out how to become okay. And sometimes then we abuse our power. We don't know how to use our energy. We don't know how to take care of ourselves energetically to keep our own energy bubble nice and clean and clear and well charged, so that the world doesn't come in and invade us so easily. And that queen is one of my favorites because she has two shadow queens that I know very well. One is I call her the cutthroat queen, and the other is the beheaded queen. So when I'm overusing my power or misusing my power, out comes my sword, and I'm out there just off with their heads, running around, just trying to get life to bend to my will. I don't operate that way much anymore, but it can occasionally still pop up. And then the other one is where we are so afraid of our own power that we cut off our own heads and sort of try to live life from carrying our head around underneath our arm. And we can't really make life happen that way. There's not enough power and energy in that way of living. So we feel often like a victim in that space. So
Okay.
then we move into the passionate queen. She's all about our life force energy, our sexual sovereignty, and our sense of sensuality, our sense of delight in the world, our needs, our wants, our desires. It's a generative space, but most of us didn't grow up in what I like to call sex positive households, where it's okay for us to talk about sexuality, and let's not have shame around this. Let's not feel guilt around my desires. We're human beings, and we're made to connect in these ways. And so how can we learn to turn that passion on and use it in responsible ways, in ways that creates more love, more harmony, more connection, more joy, more passion, more pleasure? So that's what the passionate queen gets to do.
Okay.
And then finally, there's the grounded queen. And she's also a very, very powerful queen because she's all about physical sovereignty. And how are we doing in the arena of health? Are we feeling safe at the deepest level in our being, safe to be who we are? Do we know that we have the right to exist, that we're allowed to be on the planet? And not just allowed, but we're important. Our energy is important, and we've been created for some reason, and we get to discover what that is. And so she is the queen that helps us to deal with our deepest fears and to learn that we can become the source of our own safety, which is really important.
So let's go through those again real quick. Then number one,
The divine queen.
number two.
Well, actually, let's go from the opposite direction, because when you get them in the book, you'll read them in this way. So the first queen you'll meet is the grounded queen.
Okay.
Then there's the passionate queen, the empowered queen, the loving queen, the expressive queen, the visionary queen, and the divine queen. And they all have beautiful portraits. This is a full color book, and just staring at those portraits themselves is activating and can draw you into a meditative state. I commissioned a beautiful artist, Jenny Hahn. She's an evolutionary artist to paint those pictures for me. And it's a very interesting journey to meet the queens and go on and actually be in relationship with them. And you develop what I call your own inner council of, whether it's your king's council or your queen's council, and they're there to support you.
So, you talked about awareness, and we talk about really becoming who we really are. And I think that becomes just in and of itself a concept that some people struggle with. That realize that who you really are really has nothing to do necessarily with what you look like at that point in time. But how do people know whether or not they're actually really embodying themselves? They really are who they are versus they're who everybody has told them they should be.
A sense of peace is the indicator. When we're really have made friends with the truth of who we are, when we've told ourselves the truth about who we are and come to accept ourselves, enough that we're really willing to risk showing that person to the outside world, what happens is we get a sense of peace, because there's not this inner war going on between the secret self and the social self, you know? And once we get to this point where we've made peace with who we are, and we're showing up in this way that's in integrity, in the truest form of the word, what happens is the love we then receive from others starts to feel real, because they're loving the real us. We're showing the real us, and they're loving the real us, rather than this social self that then we're not really sure. Well, I don't even know if they really love me, because I haven't really shown who I really am. And we question everything that happens in our lives because we're not being authentic. And so I think the peace, though, it's what I want to say about it is that when you first get on this journey, it doesn't feel very peaceful. It actually feels a little bit chaotic, because you start to tear down and get rid of the old structures, the old ways of thinking, the old patterns and conditioning that we had. And for a while, it can feel like you're on shifting sand. Like, I don't even know, who I am anymore. And it becomes a very liberating feeling as you move through it, and you start to see, oh, wow, I don't have to be burdened by that past anymore. I can actually become free. And that's when, as the peace starts to become more and more of our daily experience.
And what do you do when you're surrounded in a situation where your environment is just constantly reminding you of who you really don't want to be?
Yeah, that's so tough. Sometimes we have to make hard choices. And this is, I think, the reason that a lot of people don't take up the work is that they're afraid of change. They know that if they really started down the path, they might have to say to their beloved partner, or maybe they're not even so beloved anymore, but they'd have to say to their partner, I'm not happy the way things are right now. And they feel afraid. They don't know if their partner would meet them in wanting to change, or they might have to leave their job, or choose to leave their job, or shake up their relationships a little bit in order to get to a better life. But what I always say to people is, you have this one life, right? You have this one life, and it doesn't matter when you start, even doesn't matter how old you are. It is never too late to start creating a life that's actually the life you want to be living, and a life you actually love.
How true. So when someone reads your book, do you find that they identify pretty much with one specific queendom? Or do they ultimately adopt them all? How does that work?
Well, we have a little quiz actually on my website. You can go to rimabonario.com and take the quiz to see which is your strongest queen archetype. That's sort of fun, to figure that out. But in reality, what you're wanting to do is to develop a relationship with all of these queens, because we need sovereignty in all of these areas. And it's useful to get a sense of which ones you kind of got those down, and which ones you really need a little bit more support around. And the book is full of questions and exercises and activities that people can take themselves through in order to shore up some of the areas where they're not having as much success in life. And then, of course, I offer online programs for people who want to go a little bit deeper into the study to actually develop an incredibly powerful set of skills and tools in each of these different queendoms.
And let's talk about that. So, those that are listening to the show, if they want to work with you, how do they get involved?
They should come to my website and visit me there. Again, it's rimabonario.com, RIMAB as in boy, ON as in Nancy, ARIO. I'm the only Rima Bonario in the world that I know of. So that's kind of cool. When you have a strange name, it works out like that. And you can sort of see what I offer there on my website right now. We've got a program that I do in the fall called the Queen's Council, where I invite some colleagues to come and be in a joint faculty with me, and we teach a joint class where we go through each of the seven queendoms, and they offer their own powerful practices that support these queens. And then I have an annual program for the women that really are wanting to commit. And the level of transformation that happens in these women in 12 months time, it's extraordinary to see what happens when we start paying attention to each of these areas and start to take action steps. And more than even what we're doing in the world, it's who we become on the inside that then just naturally allows our world to reorder in a more efficient and effective and in a way that's in greater integrity and authenticity.
And I think you hit it on the head. You know, so often we've been taught that we need to do, we need to do, we need to do in order to become, when in fact we see what that's doing in our society right now versus becoming. And as we truly become, then naturally what we will do will be showing forth greater love, greater understanding, greater forgiveness, all of those types of things. What would be the final message you'd like to leave with the audience today?
So I think the final thing that I would like to offer is an invitation for you to give yourself the gift of seeking to align with that deeper, most essential part of who you are. Because when we live life in that order, from our beingness outward instead of from the doingness inward, everything in life gets better.
Rima, thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
So insightful. And you know, it's amazing to me how there are people out there such as yourself who have had these experiences in many cases, you know, as you had mentioned, growing up in a very difficult family situation, where they will make that change, they will make that awareness, they will make that becoming a reality in their lives, and then they're willing to share that with others. It's not easy to be that transparent sometimes.
It's true. It's my life's calling. It's my passion.
So kudos to you. I really appreciate you being on the show today.
Thank you.
And folks, thanks for listening. Hope you've enjoyed it, and we look forward to having you join us again soon.